Chapter 63, 4th year, December. Wednesday, the 4th of December, 1974. They were all given 3 weeks' detention with McGonagall, which meant lines and extra homework, and were banned from Hogsmeade until the next year, much to Peter's horror. Poor Miss Lewis would have to wait. This also meant that Remus wouldn't be able to buy any Christmas presents for his friends, but he was grateful for that excuse. He had so far amounted a small fortune, well, in his eyes anyway, of 10 galleons and 12 sickles. It wasn't anywhere near James's inheritance, of course, or even Sirius's bequeathal from his uncle, but it was more than Remus had ever had, even in Muggle money. He'd already started making plans for the moment he turned 17. Learning how to apparate was key. He had to be sure to get that right. Then, he would buy enough supplies and begin his search. And he thought he knew where to start. This term, ever since he had been back at Hogwarts, Remus had been reading the Daily Prophet cover to cover. He borrowed James's copy and made notes privately, usually in the library, where the other marauders wouldn't bother him. He was looking for anything, attacks, sightings, rumours, anything related to werewolves or unidentified dark creatures. There was very little in there. James maintained that this was because the Ministry didn't want to frighten anyone. But there were still clues. Sometimes there were stories about auras breaking up, illegal gatherings or meetings, always in distant, far-flung places, the Outer Hebrides or Brecon Beacons, and they were always the night before the full moon. Greyback was gathering followers, and no one else seemed to care. Even the auras were casual about it, just like they had been with Lyle. By early December, Remus was concerned enough to consult Ferox. This year's Care of Magical Creatures syllabus had proved to be just as fascinating as the year before, and Ferox's dedication to teaching had not waned. He had even hinted at bringing in a real demiguise as a Christmas treat, though Remus had no idea where he was going to get one. The teacher had taken them all down to the lake for one lesson, where Ferox had held a long, high-pitched conversation with one of the mer people who lived there. No one had the foggiest clue what they were talking about, but it had been interesting nonetheless, and Remus had made some very useful diagrams. It was armed with these diagrams and the accompanying essay that Remus approached Ferox's office one gloomy afternoon in December. Since both Sirius and James were now on the Quidditch team, it was much easier for Remus to sneak away and conduct his own personal business, lately either werewolf hunting or as Hogwarts' premier tobacco supplier. Lily had asked if he wanted to go to the library with her. He thought she must be feeling a bit lonely this term. She was often asking if he wanted to go here or there with her. He hadn't noticed that she was spending any less time with Mary and Marlene, but who knew with girls? Anyway, having extricated himself from the all other responsibilities, Remus knocked purposefully on the door to Ferox's office. "Come in," the familiar Liverpudlian sing-song voice called out. Remus smiled and stepped inside. "Hi, Professor," he said, clutching his papers. "Lupin, sit down, sit down." Ferox beamed up at him from behind his desk. He appeared to be making repairs to a very large golden cage, his desktop covered with tools and wires and other oddments which didn't seem to belong in a teacher's office. "I've got my merfolk essay here." He put it down on the only free bit of surface space. "Blimey, Remus, you're keen." Professor Ferox smiled, tidying away his tools into a leather pouch. "That wasn't due until the last day of term." Remus shrugged, secretly thrilled. "I had it finished, so thought might as well hand it in now." "Very good. Fancy a tea?" "Yes, please." Ferox pushed the large cage to one side and waved his wand casually. Ferox's wand was shorter than Remus's and thicker, made of some knobbly type of wood, as if it was snapped directly from a tree branch. A teapot appeared from nowhere, closely followed by 2 cups and saucers which clattered noisily onto the table. They were quite old and chipped in places. "Oops," Ferox grinned bashfully. Never had much finesse with charms. That's my old nan's set too. Remus smiled politely and used his own wand to pour the tea. He found levitation very easy, and Ferox looked impressed. Nan used to drink it from the saucer and everything, he murmured nostalgically, lifting the cup to his lips. Thought it was elegant, bless her. Remus never knew what to say when people started talking about their relatives. It had taken him 4 years to learn that people who had families did not really want to hear about the experiences of people without them. It made them uncomfortable. Ferox seemed to notice Remus's polite reticence and changed tact. At this point, my nan would have offered a biscuit and a cigarette, but I'm afraid I've run out of both. Remus raised his eyebrows and fished inside his pocket. Here, sir, he said, offering the box of Marlboros. Ah, so the rumours are true. Our resident bootlegger. Remus shrugged again, carefully trying to mask his excitement, as Ferox actually accepted a cigarette and lit it neatly with his wand point. How'd you do that? He asked, trying it with his own wand to no avail. Ferox chuckled. Come here. And Remus leaned across the desk to allow Ferox to light his cigarette. Better not teach you. The teacher winked. It's a terrible habit. Remus grinned through the cloud of smoke, taking a long drag. So, Ferox said, leaning back in his chair, I take it this is more than just a social visit, young Lupin? Yeah, sort of. Remus nodded, clearing his throat. I just had to ask a few more questions about... Well, I didn't know who to ask, and you said last year I could always come to you. Of course! Is this about your father? Oh no, Remus shook his head vehemently. Not him. He may have sounded a bit more forceful than he meant to, but he was sick of Lyle Lupin and the awful, hollow, guilty feeling he got when he thought about the man. He didn't want to know any more about the past. This was about his future. Remus took another puff, letting it steady his nerves. It's about Greyback. Remus, I deserve to know, he said darkly, losing his smile. It's my life. Ferox looked at him for a long time, before sighing. Just like your dad. Okay, what do you want to know? Not that there's much I can tell you, mind. Far as anyone knows, he's still a wanted man. The articles you gave me, one of them said the ministry thought he was trying to raise an army. That's why he likes children. That's just a rumour, Ferox said, brows knit together. There's no evidence. I'm evidence, Remus said, unconsciously pressing a hand to his side, where the worst scar of his was hidden under his uniform. It still doesn't mean... Well, if he'd been trying to do that in the 60s, then you'd think we'd know about it by now. That was an empty line of reasoning, in Remus's opinion. He waved a hand. They've been attacks, if you read the papers properly. The Dark Lord, he's the perfect person to encourage Greyback, from what I've heard. Something needs to be done to stop the people joining them. To stop people like me joining him. I don't know what you know about the so-called Dark Lord, Ferox replied stiffly. But he's only interested in blood purity. He would consider someone like Greyback a half-breed, beneath him. Remus thought of Snape and the other Slytherins, and immediately dismissed this theory too. You might not respect him, but as long as Greyback gets the job done, and if he gets enough followers, you're overestimating his powers, both of them. The Dark Lord is just a political upstart feeding off some perceived oppression. No one takes him seriously. No one who matters. And Greyback, well, he's practically a derelict, a raving lunatic. Neither of them had anything substantial to offer their followers. Remus snorted. Yeah, well, the ministry doesn't exactly have much to offer me, except for a collar and a bard's cell. Remus, that's not true. Ferox sounded distressed. Remus didn't care. Yes, it is. I'm nearly 15. I'm not a little boy. My job prospects are only slightly less shit as a muggle than they are as a wizard. Can't help but notice I'm the only one at Hogwarts. Can't help but notice I'm not supposed to tell anyone. Oh wait, until I'm 17. Then I have to tell everyone, right? Then everyone else knows how to avoid me in case I get a bit peckish. Greyback might not have much to offer as half-breeds when you haven't got anything else going for you. Remus, No, I've read the laws and the statutes and the bullshit fucking registry. He stubbed out his cigarette in the dregs of his teacup furiously. The full moon was weeks away, but his temperature was rising, his heart pounding as he glared at Ferox, challenging him to answer. Ferox himself looked quite shaken, struck dumb. This in itself cooled Remus's temper. He had meant to have a rational discussion. He had wanted to learn things, not yell at his favourite teacher. He pulled out another cigarette and lit it with the matchbox he'd carried, then pushed the box across the desk to Ferox. "Keep it," he said quietly, inhaling. "I'm sorry, didn't mean to shout." "It's okay to shout, Remus," Ferox smiled weakly. "Especially when someone isn't listening and you need to be heard." Remus looked at him quizzically. Ferox relaxed a bit. "I think you see anger as a weakness, but it isn't. It's good to be angry. And you've got a bloody good reason to be. You're right. We all need to worry about Voldemort, and Greyback, and the rest of the pureblood crowd. If the Ministry is prepared to treat good, clever, thoughtful wizards the way they treat you, then people like the Dark Lord will always have followers." Remus stared at him, stunned. "But," Ferox said, "there will always be people working against them too, and as long as we stay angry, they won't win." "They won't win," Remus repeated. He usually felt embarrassed after an outburst like that, but now he actually felt calmer, relieved even. "And don't you think for a minute that you have shit prospects?" Ferox raised an eyebrow. "If you think Dumbledore moved heaven and earth to get you an education just to see you end up no better than a squib, then you don't know Dumbledore, my boy." Friday the 20th of December, 1974. As December drew on and the nights grew longer, the castle became engulfed in fairy lights and a heavy blanket of snow. Everyone seemed in higher spirits than usual, and more excited to celebrate Christmas than ever before. Owls swooped through the halls at lightning speed, delivering packages and brightly enveloped cards. The herbology teacher had enchanted holly and ivy to weave itself around every chandelier and banister. Professor Flitwick could be seen most evenings teaching the portraits to sing carols, and Sirius Black ended the term dressed head to toe in tinsel. This hadn't actually been Sirius's idea. James had started it, using an everlasting sticking charm to affix the decorations to the collars and cuffs of Sirius's robes while he was asleep. If he'd thought he might embarrass Sirius, he was sorely mistaken. Black adored his new look and wore it with pride. In fact, by the last day of term, at least 15 other boys had copied him, as well as a group of girls who had lately taken to following Sirius around. It seemed that every girl in the school had now found out about the great snogging race, and the effect was not what Remus had hoped for. While Marlene had acted sensibly in rejecting Black's advances, there were plenty of girls in their year, and even in the year above, who were hoping to help Sirius win the bet. He'd thought this great fun at first, but after almost a month of being followed by a pack of giggling teenagers, receiving heavily scented love notes, and being interrupted at almost every turn, he had enlisted Mary as a bodyguard. Mary was perfect for this, bolshy, ready to speak her mind, and not interested in Sirius at all. "You're such a wuss," she sighed on the last evening of term, as they all sat around the fireplace together. James was playing with a golden snitch he'd nicked from the garden shed, trying to impress Lily, had her head down and was frantically finishing her Christmas cards. Peter was nowhere to be found. Marlene was playing a game of chess with Remus, and Sirius had just called Mary to sit next to him, cautiously eyeing up a group of girls watching him from the corner. "I'm not a wuss," he replied dryly, loosening his tie. "I just like my privacy." "You can always just snog one of them," Mary shot back, stretching out on the couch and draping her legs over Sirius's lap. He let her. Wasn't that the whole point of the bet? Well, yeah, Sirius replied in a measured tone, but they weren't supposed to know about it. I was supposed to win them over with my charms and roguish good looks. You're not scared, are you? Mary purred. I'd be mad not to be scared of girls, Sirius laughed. You're all mental. Mary, what's Darren's surname? Lily asked, looking up from her stack of cards. Harvey, Mary said. God, you're not sending him a card, are you? You've only met him once. It's nice to get cards at Christmas, Lily smiled, returning to her writing. All right, but don't send it by owl. He's a muggle. How have you been writing to him all year? Remus asked, genuinely interested. I send the letters to my mum, and she pops them through his letterbox. He only lives across the hall, and there's a phone box just outside Hogsmeade, so we've chatted once or twice. I didn't know there was a phone box. Yeah, it's a bit ancient. One of the Ravenclaws told me it was a portkey once during the war, but it still works. She stretched again. I can't wait to see him, she sighed. Sirius pushed her legs away, pretending to lean over and watch the game of chess. Where are you for Christmas, Remus? Lily asked, licking her final envelope. Not staying here, I hope. Lupin and Black are at mine again, James said eagerly. Lily gave him a withering look. Oh, of course. Remus was really looking forward to the Potters this year. He'd only be staying a week, as the full moon fell on the 29th, but that was fine by him. He just couldn't wait for the presents and the decorations and Mrs. Potter's cooking. I'm starving, Sirius yawned lazily. Where's Pete? Can we send him to the kitchens for us? No idea where he is, actually, James said. Haven't seen him since dinner. Is he packing? Lily suggested. I'll go and check. Remus stood up, stretching. I'm hungry too. I think there are some cauldron cakes in my trunk. You don't say. Sirius got up too, following him. Remus sighed. Sirius spent half of his time begging for sweets off the rest of them. Not that he wasn't generous with his own, he just very rarely seemed to have any. Peter was not in the dorm room, but the cauldron cakes were. Wonder what's happened to him. Remus rubbed the back of his head. Check the map, Sirius said, spraying crumbs everywhere, mouth full of cake. Remus raised an eyebrow but said nothing, and retrieved the map from his bedside table. He cast the locator spell, and the map quickly highlighted the small flag with the name Peter Pettigrew. It looked as though he was in a broom cupboard, near the charms classroom. What's he doing there? Sirius mumbled, stuffing another piece of cake into his mouth. Remus tutted this time, folding the map. Dunno. You don't reckon the Slytherins got him? Maybe, Sirius swallowed. If they put a binding spell on him, he might be stuck there all night. Let's go and get him then. Shall I get James? Sirius glanced at the door, and Remus knew at once that he was dreading having to pass the gauntlet of girls waiting down there. Nah, let's take the cloak and sneak down. It won't take long, and only the two of us fit anyway. Remus shrugged by way of consent. If it didn't take too long to rescue Peter, then maybe they could go to the kitchens afterwards. Sirius had finished his cauldron cakes. They huddled under the cloak together and hurried quietly downstairs, past James and the girls, out through the portrait hole. Bloody typical of Peter, Sirius huffed, under his breath. 4 years as a marauder and still crap at defensive spells. Maybe they attacked from behind, Remus suggested. Or maybe there were a lot of them. He didn't know why, but he loved contradicting Sirius. James called it bickering, but Sirius had never given any sign that it bothered him. On they went, through the shadowy stone hallways towards the charm corridor. Here! Is it that one? Sirius whispered as they reached a door. Yeah, Remus replied. He's in there. He could smell him. Okay, wand ready. 1, 2, 3. Sirius yanked open the door quickly, much to the surprise of Peter, who was very much not in danger, and Desdemona Lewis, who shrieked. Who's there? She stared around, pale and wide-eyed, her hair messed up and her lips very pink and wet. Peter stared about as well, slightly more suspiciously, but just as rumpled. Probably just Peeves. Sirius began to shudder with laughter, and Remus quickly clamped a hand over his mouth, trying to pull him away from the cupboard. Poor Peter. I'm going back to the common room. I'll get in so much trouble if I get caught out of bounds again, Desdemona was saying, straightening her blouse. She kissed Peter dainty on the nose. See you tomorrow, Petey. On the train? Yeah, okay, Peter replied, very distracted, still staring about, looking for their invisible assailant. Remus thanked whatever god was there for his superior strength, as Sirius fought madly to get free and cause him even more mischief. Remus did not let him go until Desdemona had disappeared around the corner. Peter was wise to the situation by then anyway. All right, show yourselves. He pulled out his wand as Remus released Sirius, and they both burst out from under the invisibility cloak. I knew it! Peter yelled. You sneak! Sirius crowed, laughing so hard he was holding his stomach. How long has that been going on? A week, Peter replied, turning red. How did you find me? A week? Merlin Pettigrew, what do you think you're doing, lying to us for a whole week? You would have teased me. We tease you anyway. Can we please go to the kitchens now? Remus sighed. Wait till James hears about this, Sirius said, sounding awestruck. I can't believe it. I really can't. Peter Pettigrew, ladies' man. Oh, shut up, Peter sulked, shoving his hands in his pockets. I'm going to the common room. I'm not hungry. Well, the way you were eating Lewis's face off. Shut up. Peter disappeared around the next corridor. Sirius laughed all the way to the kitchens and was still slightly hysterical on the way back, even laden with treats and goodies from the house elves. At least this means that stupid snogging race is over, Remus said pleasantly, as they approached the portrait of the fat lady. Sirius stopped dead in his tracks, causing Remus to bump into him, nearly dropping his bottle of butterbeer. Ugh, I didn't think of that. Well, you don't have to think about it now, Remus snapped, rubbing his elbow where he'd banged it. Pete won. You're right, Moody. Ugh, that means if I don't get a snog by the end of this year, then I'm more of a loser than Pettigrew. Remus sighed, heavily. Chapter 64, 4th year, Christmas. Monday the 23rd of December, 1974. Though Hogwarts had been as picturesque as a Christmas card under its blanket of Highland snow, the marauders stepped off the train in London to grey southern drizzle. The weather continued in much the same way for most of the Christmas break, meaning that sledging was off the cards this year, much to Remus's disappointment. It meant that the first few days before Christmas were pretty boring, and they made up for it by making regular trips into the village under Mr. Potter's huge black umbrella, and spent long afternoons in the Muggle cinema there. Remus had convinced them to go. He hadn't been to see a film since he started at Hogwarts, and Steve's gang had been talking about Death Wish all summer, so he was dying to see it. It was just as exciting as he'd hoped, full of revenge and gore, and Charles Bronson reminded him a bit of Professor Ferox. James and Sirius were more interested in figuring out how the projector worked, which suited Remus fine, because it meant they agreed to go with him twice. However, boredom soon got the better of them, and on the third visit to the picture house, a distraction presented itself in the form of a group of girls queuing at the ticket booth. At once, James and Sirius stopped discussing the ins and outs of visual perception versus frame rate, and started acting very oddly indeed. James made more of an effort to flatten his hair than ever, while Sirius began leaning casually against the wall as if he was James Dean. The girls obviously noticed and kept glancing back and then giggling amongst themselves. They must be freezing, wearing miniskirts in December, Remus thought to himself. Finally, the girls finished buying their tickets and went into the second screen. "Moony," Sirius said, not taking his eyes off the gaggle of long legs that had just passed. "How about we see something different today?" "Yeah," James nodded blankly. Remus looked up at the poster above the door. The Great Gatsby. He screwed up his face. "Ugh, it's a romance, though. What do you want to see that for?" he protested. But it was too late. They were already halfway in. Remus settled down in the front row and resigned himself to his fate. It might not be that bad. He had liked Robert Redford in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. He wasn't as cool as Charles Bronson, but he might shoot someone, at the very least. Half an hour later, and, as much as he didn't want to admit it, Remus was thoroughly immersed in the film. For all its pastel shades and silly costumes, there had been no shooting so far, but he was hoping for the best, and in the meantime was rooting for Daisy to see sense and leave her awful husband. At some point, Remus glanced to his left to see if Sirius and James were enjoying the film too, and found that he had been abandoned. Twisting about in his seat, he stared into the darkness behind him, and could just about make out the dark shapes of his two friends sitting in the very back row, both engaged in some kind of horrendous teenage grappling match with two of the girls from before. Mortified, Remus turned around at once, slouching down low in the red velvet seat. He couldn't concentrate on the film now. And he'd been right anyway. It was a stupid, boring, girly romance, and Robert Redford clearly wasn't going to shoot anyone anytime soon. In a split second, he made his decision and quickly left the theatre. It was too late to get a ticket for Death Wish, and the usher behind the ticket stand was giving him a very pointed look, so he shoved his hands deep in his pockets and sloped out, feeling bitter and mean. The town James's parents lived in was a lot posher than the one Remus had grown up in. It was all pretty red brick cottages and oak trees. There was a big village green at the centre, and Remus could imagine cricket taking place there in the summer. It was raining now, though, and James had the umbrella, so Remus had no choice but to duck for cover under the nearest bus shelter. There was a little shop right opposite the bus stop, and he watched it for a while, checking out the simplest entry points. Not that he was going to break in. He definitely could. It looked really easy. But what if Mr. Potter and Mrs. Potter found out? They'd never have him back for Christmas again. He thought about going back to the house, but he didn't want to explain why he'd left Sirius and James at the picture house like that. Pricks. He kicked the side of the shelter with his heavy boots. An old woman, walking past with her little Scotty dog, tutted at him loudly, and he swore in return, throwing up a middle finger. Even James had let him down. James, whose pure and honest adoration for Lily Evans had been the one thing which convinced Remus that snogging might not be that disgusting after all. He'd expected something like this from Sirius, who had never had any kind of impulse control anyway. But James? "Oi, Moony!" As if by magic, James and Sirius appeared on the other side of the road, underneath a big black umbrella. He tried to ignore them, but it was a bit stupid, seeing as they were the only three people on the street. "Where are you off to?" Sirius grinned, as they crossed to join him under the bus shelter. "Just sitting here," Remus shrugged. "Why'd you leave?" "Could ask you the same." "We only popped off for a minute." "Ugh, don't want to hear about it." Remus covered his ears. He glared at James. "What about Lily?" "What about, 'it's not time yet, but I don't mind'?" Remus parroted back the words James had spoken in November. James looked stricken for a moment, but Sirius laughed heartily and slapped Remus on the shoulder. "Oh, come off it. Evans isn't going to care if Potter snogged some muggle girl when he was 14. Calm down, Moony." That did it. If there was anything more likely to send Remus into a rage, it was being told to calm down. "No," he growled. You made me watch that stupid girls' film just so that you could grope a couple of muggle birds in the back row." Sirius tossed his dark hair and rolled his eyes. "Merlin, Lupin, we can go and see your beloved Charles Bronson tomorrow if you really want. I mean, excuse us if we want to act like normal teenagers for 5 minutes." Something about this insult struck Remus so sharply that if he'd had his wand, he'd have cursed Sirius right there and then. As it was, he only has his fists. Fortunately, he was pretty good with those, and punching was often a lot more satisfying than cursing. By the time James had wrenched them apart and stood between them, Sirius's nose was extremely bloody, and Remus could feel the beginnings of a black eye forming. "What's wrong with you two?" James huffed, dragging them both through the rain back to his parents' house. "He's a tosser," Remus spat, trying to keep the drizzle out of his sore eye. "He's a wanker," Sirius returned, stuffily, holding his wet jumper against his nose. "You're both dickheads," James said firmly as they reached the front gate. Mrs. Potter fixed them up both very quickly. She was just as quick at healing spells as Madame Pomfrey, then gave them a good telling off, with Mr. Potter standing behind her, trying not to smile and saying, "Boys will be boys, Effie dear." Afterwards, Remus went straight up to the spare room and sat on the bed for the rest of the day doing his holiday homework. He knew it was childish and silly to sulk, but if he had to see Sirius again, he couldn't be sure he wouldn't swing for him. He thought about Ferox telling him, "It's good to be angry," but somehow didn't think that was what the teacher meant. Was he jealous? Jealous that all his friends had copped off with a girl now and he hadn't? Maybe that was it. Remus couldn't really ignore the fact that he was the only one of his friends who wasn't completely driven by his hormones like a normal teenager, as Sirius had so kindly put it. Ouch, there was that pain again. Remus drew his knees up under his chin, making himself as small as possible. If he had a galleon for every way in which he was not normal. He went down for dinner, but didn't talk to James or Sirius, limiting himself only to polite interchanges with Mr. and Mrs. Potter. After they were excused from the table, he went straight back upstairs and curled up under the duvet with a book until he fell asleep. He dreamt that he was back in the theatre, trying to watch a strange combination of The Great Gatsby and Death Wish, in which Professor Ferox really was Charles Bronson, black moustache and all, aiming his pistol at the gleaming socialites of West Egg. Something kept nudging Remus's elbow, distracting him from the film. He turned and saw that it was Peter and Desdemona, withering about in the seat beside him, lips locked. Annoyed, Remus got up and sat in the row behind, returning to the film. Soon, something else bothered him. It was Mary and Darren. Remus had of course never met Darren, and the boy in the dream looked a bit like Mulciber for some reason. They were snogging too. Disgusted, Remus tried to get up once more, but tripped over Lily and James, who were rolling in the aisle. "For God's sake!" he shouted. Lily looked up at him and laughed. So did Mary, and now Peter and James too. Sirius appeared at the very back of the theatre, his body silhouetted by the whirring projector. "Never mind him," he laughed along with the others. "He's not like us." Remus spun around in time just to see Ferox shoot Robert Redford, then woke up with a start. He was hot and sweating under the heavy duvet, and had to fight to free himself. Feeling very silly for having a nightmare at his age, he climbed out of the large four-poster bed and headed to the nearest bathroom. The clock on the landing read midnight, so he didn't turn any lights on, though he could see a faint yellowish glow seeping out from under James's bedroom door. Remus used the loo, then washed his hands and face, taking a few sips from the cold tap before wiping himself dry on his pyjama sleeves. Feeling much better, he returned to his bedroom, just as James's door swung open. "Bloody hell, it's you, Moony," James whispered, sounding relieved. "What are you doing creeping around in the dark?" Remus shrugged and whispered back, "I can see in the dark. Didn't want to wake anyone up." James nodded and opened his door a bit wider. "Thought you might be Gully, spying on us for Mum or something." Come in, yeah? Let's all be mates again. It didn't take much convincing for Remus to agree. Fighting took up so much energy, especially when you all lived together. He still didn't really want to talk to Sirius, but he went in for James's sake. Sirius was sitting cross-legged on James's bed and frowned when he saw Remus. James sighed. Come on, we're all friends, right? It's Christmas. Sirius nodded solemnly. Remus nodded back. He joined them on the bed, where he was surprised to see they were poring over some spell books. Homework? He asked. Prank, James replied. Haven't worked out the kinks yet, though. Oh, okay. Remus nodded. And then, because he didn't want it to be awkward anymore, he asked, How's your nose, Black? Fine. Sirius grinned at him, relaxing into humour at once. You're losing your touch. Remus smirked. Oh yeah? Asked Snape. Headbutted him on the train in September. You never did. Yup. Bloody hell, James laughed. And he hasn't tried it on since? Not yet, Remus said, trying not to sound too nervous about it. Probably planning something, though. What's the prank? We'll, tell you when we know how to do it. Might not come off right, James said quickly, closing the book nearest him. Remus raised an eyebrow and said nothing. This only confirmed a suspicion he'd had for quite some time. He didn't want to get into any of that now, though. He'd wait and see if anything came of it. Sorry I brought up Lily, he told James. I didn't mean it. Sirius is right. She won't care. If she's ever stupid enough to go out with you, that is. James shoved him playfully. Piss off. At least that stupid competition is over now, yeah? Remus asked hopefully, looking at Sirius. Yeah, I suppose. Sirius shrugged. We paid Pete his dues anyway. What a letdown, though. Snogging. I mean, don't know what the fuss is about. Remus didn't say anything, though he was secretly pleased. So, he wasn't missing out on anything after all. It was all right, James said diplomatically. Probably takes practice. Must get better. It had better, Sirius said, very seriously. James and Remus burst out laughing. Christmas Day, 1974. Christmas morning was as dark and gloomy as the previous week had been, and Remus was woken by the noise of the rain pelting against his bedroom window. Still, the Potter's house was as festive as ever, and the five of them settled down to a hearty breakfast with smiles on their faces. Breakfast was quickly followed by presents, the usual fare of sweets, chocolates, new quills from the Potters, books, and socks. Remus was very surprised to receive a hand-knitted scarf from Lily, in Gryffindor red with gold tassels. He felt a bit bad. He hadn't bought anything for any of the Marauders this year, let alone any of the girls. She had never given him a gift before, except for the reading aid, which, he had to admit, had been a pretty good present. He resolved to get something for her next time they went to Hogsmeade. They were just finishing up with presents, Mrs. Potter vanishing the scrunched-up wrapping paper with a sweep of her wand, when a loud, mournful song sounded in the hallway. It was a high-pitched, haunting melody, completely unnatural and completely beautiful. They all turned at once, Mr. and Mrs. Potter withdrawing their wands in a duelling stance, and a strange, ethereal silver bird flew into the room, circling their heads. Remus recognised it at once as a phoenix, or something like the ghost of one. Dumbledore, Mr. Potter said quietly, as the silver phoenix settled majestically on the mantelpiece. Much to Remus's surprise, the bird opened its beak and spoke in their headmaster's voice. There has been an attack. I will be with you shortly. Do not allow anyone else entry. And with that, the phoenix vanished into thin air. They were all quiet for a while before Mrs. Potter spoke, placing a hand on James's shoulder as if she just needed to touch her son. Oh, Monty, an attack! No need to panic, Mr. Potter said calmly. Albus will be here soon. Boys, Finish cleaning up, yeah? I'll be in my study." They tidied up in silence, all waiting to see what would happen next. An attack? What could that mean? Remus's mind went straight to Greyback, but it wasn't a full moon, so unlikely to have been werewolves. Could it be Voldemort? Or were there other dark wizards out there? Guiltily, he looked over at Sirius, who was staring out of the window at rain, looking pale and shocked. His family were dark wizards. Did he know anything about this? Well, surely not. Remus quickly dismissed the idea, feeling even worse. Sirius hadn't been home since summer, and it was common knowledge that his family hated him. Finally, after what felt like a decade, but could only have been 20 minutes, there was a crack of apparition outside, and Mr. Potter was at the front door. Mrs. Potter joined him, and James, Sirius and Remus hung back in the hallway watching. The door opened, and Dumbledore stood there looking very grave, completely dry despite the rain beating down in sheets. "Fleamont? You familiar?" He nodded politely. Mr. Potter held up his wand. "What was the last thing we spoke about?" "Your son having broken his record for number of detentions this term." Dumbledore smiled, glancing at James, who turned red. This apparently satisfied Mr. Potter, who stepped back to allow Dumbledore entry. "Come in, Dumbledore. Would you like some tea?" Mrs. Potter asked, taking his travelling cloak and ushering him into the living room. "Upstairs, boys," Mr. Potter said sternly. James looked about ready to argue, but Dumbledore stepped in for him. "If you wouldn't mind, Fleamont, I think it best that the boys hear this. It will be all over the papers tomorrow anyway." Mr. Potter looked at his wife, then nodded. The small party sat down in the large living room, waiting for Gully to come in with the tea. It was a very odd scene. Christmas cards still glittering on the wall, tinsel sparkling along the picture rails, open presents piled under the tree, and Dumbledore still looking uncharacteristically serious in midnight blue velvet robes. Sirius, James and Remus sat squashed up on one sofa, while Mr. Potter remained standing, pacing the room. "An attack, then?" he said, impatient. "I'm afraid so. The Fraser family, in Newcastle." "Fraser? Never heard of them." "No. Mr. and Mrs. Fraser were both Muggle-born. They had 2 children, not yet old enough for Hogwarts, but as far as we know, showing early signs of magical ability." Remus winced at the past tense. Mr. Potter had clearly noticed this too, for he looked very pale and tired all of a sudden. "All 4 of them?" "Yes." Mrs. Potter looked like she was about to cry. "Children!" she gasped. "Children!" "And do we know for sure?" Mr. Potter continued anxiously. "We know it was him. Voldemort. Yes. He left a mark." "A mark?" "It will be in the papers tomorrow, I imagine. The Daily Prophet was there before I was alerted." "But what does it mean? Who are the Frasers?" "Mr. Fraser worked for St. Mungo's," Dumbledore explained. "He recently raised a petition with the Ministry suggesting that healers receive training in Muggle healing techniques, first aid, I believed he called it. This didn't go down very well with certain fractions, as I'm sure you can imagine." "I think I remembered Darius saying something." Mr. Potter nodded, leaning a hand onto the mantelpiece thoughtfully. "But to kill." "It hasn't been the first time," Dumbledore said darkly. "But it is the first time they have made themselves known. This mark that was left behind, it has been seen elsewhere. Some of the old families have adopted it, a kind of secret sign of their allegiance to Voldemort, only not so secret anymore." "Which families?" Sirius said suddenly, looking at Dumbledore. He was tense all over. Remus could feel it. Dumbledore looked at him kindly. There is nothing so far to link the Blacks to this attack. So far, Sirius repeated. But you know there. It doesn't help anyone to jump to conclusions. Dumbledore held up a hand. The situation is grave, yes, but we must not lose our heads or allow emotion to cloud our judgment. There are difficult times ahead, and we will all need each other to be vigilant. He said this directly to Sirius, and seemed to be speaking to James and Remus too. Remus felt an uncomfortable twisting in his abdomen. He didn't understand everything, but he knew that some great responsibility had settled over their shoulders, one he wasn't sure he could live up to. I'm not trying to frighten anyone, Dumbledore continued, as if he had read Remus's mind. But nor do I wish to devalue the seriousness of today's events. I am working quickly to gather support, a line of defence against Voldemort. I have already spoken to a number of trustworthy associates within the Ministry. Fleemont, can I count on you? Of course, Mr. Potter said at once. Have you spoken to the Weasleys? The Prewetts? The Bones? Dumbledore nodded, smiling. All on my list, of course. We can help, James spoke up. Mrs. Potter sucked in her breath, her eyes still very pink. Yeah, Sirius said, eager to show himself equal to James. You can depend on us, sir. Remus didn't say anything, but he nodded along, hoping that Dumbledore knew that he had chosen his side. I hope it won't come to that. Dumbledore was smiling, his forget-me-not blue eyes twinkling with emotion for his pupils. But thank you, boys. No, Mrs. Potter said. They're children, Dumbledore. And I'm of age in 2 years, Sirius said, straightening up, asserting his position as the eldest marauder. And we're the best in the year at defensive spells. And hexes, James put in, then quickly shut up, seeing the look of his mother. Dumbledore chuckled softly. Indeed, he said. Your mother is quite right, however. All I ask is that you are on your guard, and that you look after each other. Now, I must be going. I have other calls to make, Fleemont. Dumbledore stood up and shook Mr. Potter's hand. I will be in touch, Euphemia. He turned to Mrs. Potter apologetically. Merry Christmas. I'm afraid I won't be attending your party tonight. We may as well cancel it. Mrs. Potter rubbed her arms, as if the room had turned cold. It seems disrespectful. Enjoy your holidays, boys. Remus, Madame Pomfrey will meet you at the Three Broomsticks flue stop on Sunday morning. Remus nodded obediently, and with that, Dumbledore vanished with a loud crack. End of chapter 64.